Bonjour, bienvenue. Welcome, everybody, to the second in a series of 6 workshops that Arts Consultants Canada is hosting, thanks to support from the Canada Council for the Arts. The series we call Digital Tools for the 21st Century Consultant. And my name is Victoria Steele. I'm the volunteer chair of the board of directors. And I'm coming to you from Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, otherwise known as Ottawa-Gatineau. Cet atelier va être passé en anglais pour ceux qui sont des francophones. Mais si jamais vous avez des questions en français, Lacey est capable de vous répondre. But most technical things, it's easier to do this in English. So thank you for understanding. We are recording this so that this can be available on YouTube until the end of June. Thank you for turning your cameras off so that Lacey has the stage. And before I hand this over to Lacey Alana, our capable workshop leader, I just want to acknowledge that l'Association canadienne des consultants, Arts Consultants Canada, and its membership work on the traditional territory of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people from coast to coast to coast. And we know that their presence reaches back to time immemorial here, and we acknowledge the historical oppression of their lands and their cultures in what we now know as Canada. And those of us who work in the arts, we firmly believe that the arts contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey that we're all on together. Although we acknowledge their long history of welcoming many other peoples to this beautiful territory, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work here. And now it's over to you, Lacey.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for the introduction. So we'll dive right in. I recognize a lot of names, and I know many of you were here last week, and I'll do kind of a quick intro pieces for those of you that weren't. And kind of the quick orientation of where we're going. I'll pop in a PowerPoint for those of you that like a visual on this. Quick who I am. So I wear a lot of different hats. I do a lot of training and consulting in nonprofit arts world, corporate world. I'm a multidisciplinary artist doing work in the circus world and theater world. I run some specialized programming for youth who are autistic in kind of the improv theater land and circus world. And I'm also a psychotherapist who specializes in relational neurobiology, trauma and neurodivergence, etc. And so everything that I do kind of blends different pieces from all of these disciplines together. And when we started looking at this series and kind of exploring, like, okay, what can we do to equip people with knowledge that's going to help them effectively in their lives, both right now, but also to take the knowledge of now and be able to apply that to kind of the future development of technology as it continues to expand and advance, because there are million of options now in terms of technological tools and resources. And we just know that that is going to continue to increase. And so with this, kind of the 6-part series is breaking these things down, kind of starting wide and then zeroing in more and more from theory into, okay, practically, how do we put these things together? How are we using and leveraging these digital tools? What are the things that we should be thinking about, asking ourselves that both retain to what we're doing now, but also expand and grow with us? And so, as you all are probably well aware, there are more tools than we could possibly ever use or even know about. And today we're going to look a little bit at both kind of like, what is the landscape of things that are out there, but also how do we stay up to date with that? How do we stay kind of connected to the information that's there, especially when we know that there's always going to be more information than we can possibly actually consume? And so I'll ask this question, and feel free to chat box it. You can also unmute if that works better for you. But if you have ever felt the feeling of, oh, perhaps I should use a tool, I should try to pick a tool, or I'm being given all of these different tools from different organizations that I work with, and now I have to figure out what to do with this. Has anybody had that, like the overload feeling of like, I'm not sure what tool can I even pick, or is the right one to pick if I am intentionally choosing, or the sense of like, okay, I'm getting all of these tools. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, of course. And so for me, like what I because of sort of the psychological side of me, I want to start by giving you sort of a framework to understand some of what's happening in these moments and then what we can actually do about this. Yeah, because it's very, very relatable. Like in my own sort of like business and practice, it's of course I want to be making myself more efficient, more productive, more organized, all of these things. And okay, I've heard of this and that and these tools, but like, how do I actually pick and how do I make sense of this? Because often, if we just do a random Google and say, like, oh, yeah, what are some different project management tools? We're going to get so many hits and it's often really overwhelming. And there's actually a term for this, which you've probably heard or certainly experienced, called overchoice. It's also called choice paralysis, paradox of choice, choice overload, etc. And this pertains both to this situation of like, I'm trying to select a tool to use, but also pertains to the reality where maybe you are given a tool that you had no part in selecting because an organization you work with uses it. And so now, guess what? You use it too. Um, and it may be just like, okay, well, how do I even use this? And what should I be doing in here? And what do I not need to transfer in here? And, we're crunching sort of all of these variables. And so this state of overchoice often happens when we have so many things to choose from. And during that choice, our brain is overwhelmed weighing the options. Making choices becomes harder. Like our basically, we have a limited amount of cognitive capacity to weigh things out. There's an increased chance that we're going to just be like, I don't know, this is too many things. Like, just fine, I'll use this. Or to just be like, I'm just not going to pick something or just sort of kick this down the road. So maybe it's like, okay, I'm kind of using this tool that we use in the ways that I like have to, but am I really using it? Not really. I know I need to figure that out, but I'm just going to kind of push it down the road. And we often have lower confidence in the choices we're making during the process. And that remains after we make a choice, is that we often have lower confidence in it. We're less satisfied with our choice. We are more regretful of our choice, higher anxiety, etc. And we can often end up with this increased risk of what's called expectation disconfirmation, which basically means when there's a bunch of options, we anticipate like, oh, I should be really satisfied because there's so many options, which often leads to disappointment. Okay. And so there's two caveats to this. If you are an expert in something and know what you want in advance, not having enough choices can be frustrating because you're going in and are like, okay, well, this one doesn't do it, that one doesn't do it. So that's an exception. And something else that I'll note with this is that I think this reality of choice overload is becoming more and more common because if you zoom back a couple of decades, like our lives had so much less choice, like in so many different ways, right? Like you maybe lived where you lived, you maybe married who was in the community, you ate what was available, you wore what there was available to wear. And even more recently, still less choice than we have now. And the moments where, for example, you're standing on the sideline of your kid's soccer game, but have your phone in your pocket and could also be like, oh, should I write that 10-minute email while they're on halftime? Or should I do the, um, like check my calendar for this thing? Or like, oh, yeah, I need to text this person about the whatever. Like those moments are also kind of choice overload moments. And so we're going to look at like, what do we do about this? And I'll note too, because I didn't say this at the beginning this time for new folks, if you have questions and things, feel free to ask them anytime. I'm going to download as much information as I can because I've got relatively little windows. And but feel free if things come up, feel free to ask them, and I will tell you if I'm either getting there or be sure to answer it, either today or in future trainings. Okay, so when we think about overchoice, right? I'm thinking about this in the context with technology that there's more and more of it. And it's making all of the tasks and things of life more sort of on the table at any given moment for us to do. Um, and so we want to look at like, yeah, how do we actually select something? Like, what are the ways that we can do this? And I'll talk broad and then we'll talk tools. So The idea, one of the things that helps with overchoice is starting with window shopping and curiosity. So before analyzing or before like looking at something and being like solely like, okay, will this work or not work? This feature, no, this feature, yes, maybe, this feature, no, because you're then just holding so many variables. And I often recommend focus first on collecting generalized information and even sometimes setting a deadline of like I'm just going to be looking and exploring until at minimum x date, and then after that I can weigh more variables. We'll talk more about what this sort of like window shopping phase looks like. um, there's something called unconscious decision making, which is one of the most effective ways actually to make a decision, even though we often aren't aware of it. And this basically refers to making decisions without kind of consciously analyzing or evaluating all of the available information, but first doing kind of a lot of the heavy lifting decision making based on kind of exposing ourselves to information and the subconscious evaluation that happens all of the time based on knowledge that we have, previous experiences, things we've heard, understood, etc. Because this is happening all the time, right? Like we make choices throughout our day that maybe aren't like the most mindful, but we're using all of the knowledge that we hold within us in that process. It just doesn't have quite the same kind of conscious burden with that. Okay. So this is another thing to sort of do big picture wise over choice. Other things we want to think about are creating containers for the questions. We're going to talk more in a minute about using AI and some of navigating this. But thinking about even like if you are diving into either you just suddenly have to use X tool because this job needs you to, or okay, I want to pick whatever. Make a really clear sort of intention piece of like, okay, the thing I'm trying to decide is this period, and ensuring that as you're taking in information or you're doing the evaluations, checking to see that whatever you're doing or learning is still linked to that. Because the sort of tendrils of connectivity with technology can really kind of roll and roll. Okay. We're going to talk about how we define the goals of what we're looking for more in a little bit, but when we can create some of these pieces, it's useful. Other sort of broad framework things, knowing for yourself, when are you best at making decisions? What helps you with that? Is it talking with another person through it? Is it doing this at a certain time, etc.? Right? Just these basic things of how do we intentionally do this, especially in a world because our phone's in our pocket all the time. It's really easy on the metro in the morning to be like, oh yeah, I meant to look up and research Monday and what that Monday.com, sorry, not the day. I mean, you could research the day too if you wanted, but um, and it's easy to do those things, but then sometimes we just have this like nonstop stream of stuff running in our head that isn't serving us in the process. Okay. Something else I recommend very kind of intentionally is that even before you're using a tool or need to be picking a tool, to just ensure and make it part of your regular weekly practice to engage in proactive digital learning in a low stakes way, right? This does not need to be like you're taking on a whole new hobby, but like commit 5 to 10 minutes a week, very low of like, oh yeah, I heard about this tool. I'm just going to Google that for a minute or watch a 5 minute YouTube video or read a pro and con list about it, or just like add tech podcasts to my rotation of podcasts, right? There does not have to be a like, I need to determine if I'm using this, whatever. We're just developing that practice of like, oh yeah, what is out there and engaging that kind of unconscious decision making information that helps us to continue actively, but also without the stress timeline of a decision, continue learning in this way. Okay. And we'll talk about the AI piece more in a moment. So if we're thinking about, okay, so we've thought about overchoice overall, I understand this concept and how it shows up and I'm mindful of it. How do we actually choose something or choose what to do with something if it is falling in our lap, right? There are obviously differences in those two realities, but there are definitely some overlapping pieces that we'll look at today. Okay. And so when I think about this process, often we have kind of the exploration phase of like, what's out there, what's going on, and just learning, which kind of happens all the time, even if we're not actively seeking something. we're synthesizing that information, kind of processing it, making sense of it, pursuing additional exploration as we need to. We're picking a tool or saying, like, okay, well, I have to use the Slack that I use. So I've selected that I'm now going to use it in these ways with this organization. I'm creating a planning for what does it look like to implement this, put it into action, starting the actual implementation, evaluating it, making adjustments, etc. Right? And it's this iterative process. So first, looking at exploration. How do we explore what's out there, etc.? I'm going to give like a very quick, here's the sort of like part of the lay of the land, because tech extends far beyond what we can possibly cover today. But then we're going to look at like, okay, in this world of constantly evolving tech, how do we like stay up on this as new types of things develop? And what are ways that we can do this right now and make this information gathering process easier on ourselves? Okay. So starting with just a little bit of info and then diving into some tools. Okay. So these don't cover everything. And a lot of the tools exist in multiple categories. We're going to go through some big categories. There's a lot of tools that are communication and collaboration tools that enable individuals, teams to collaborate together, to share information. Some of them more sort of like texting, messaging based, some video conferencing, whiteboarding, etc. There's a lot of overlap between communication and collaboration tools and productivity and organizational tools. And one sort of tangential thought. So we have another training next week that kind of continues to narrow in on practice. And then we're going to do a training that explores whiteboard specifically more in depth, but also within that process looks at like, how can we be as sort of engaging creatively and thinking about like critically, how can I use the tools that either I have to use or that I can choose to use? So that'll be coming in. And there's two trainings that are open yet to be determined based on what y'all want. And so just plugging that reality as we're going into this now. Yes. So communication collaboration tools, productivity organizational tools, lots of overlap here. We've got project management stuff, lots of different to-do lists. We've got kind of organizational and note types of tools. There's lots of creative tools that exist that are content makers, both free and paid. There's design tools, video editing software. There's data analytics tools, spreadsheets, data visualization. There's CRMs, right? There's so many things available, and we're not even through the slides that I have, and they don't even cover everything, right? And I know I'm moving really quickly through these, but there's a reason why. There's educational training tools. We've got online course platforms. We've got the virtual classrooms that we often see in, during the pandemic in kind of all aged learning, but especially college-y kinds of learning environments use a lot of these pieces. There's AI tools that are kind of continuing to expand and to grow. There's entertainment media tools, the social medias, the gaming platforms, the audibles, the podcast, etc. There's task specific and kind of industry specific tools. Like I use an electronic healthcare record system in my therapy work. An accountant is using accounting software. There's all of these different distinct categories. There's integration and automation tools that help sort of link things between sometimes different tools or even within emails and things like that. There's marketing tools that are helping send emails and gathering data. And, so it goes, the list is so long, right? And so it makes sense that in a world where all of these things exist, this is the tiniest portion of what exists, that it's like very overwhelming to figure out, how do I use these tools that I have to use? And how do I effectively actually pick the things that I need or that will serve me best? Okay. And so one of the things that I want to look at, and a thing that we can do to sort of move through this and to help with some of this overwhelm and make it easier for us to sort of like weigh through this information, is to look at how we can use AI now in this process. And I'm curious if I'm going to come out of the screen for a second. If folks are using any kind of AI in their lives now, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down on the reactions, or just a chat box if people are using anything AI world. at this time. Can't see anybody's faces, so I don't know if, yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down. Mm, yeah, thumbs down. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, exploring it totally. Yeah, one of the things AI is super. I mean, it's another thing that's complex. It could have a multi-part training series on its own. Oh yeah, I want to pop in. I missed that. Yeah, to create keywords for SEO, totally. And there are probably people in here, myself also not too long ago, that were like, what does that even mean exactly using AI? Like, I don't know, do I? And so I want to talk about that for a minute and I'll tell you how this is relevant to this topic today. Um, to just get everybody on the same page. AI overall refers to the ability of machines or computers to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, learning, problem solving, decision making, and natural language processing, which means being able to just like ask a question in like normal talking people words that I might use to ask one of you a question. Um, the kind of AI that's available to use right now, and that we'll be talking about how to use in this process of navigating all the tools available. Um, oh, I skipped ahead of myself a little bit, is what's called artificial narrow intelligence, sometimes called weak AI. And this is basically like a tool that has a lot of knowledge in a specific area, but can't do the sort of like, doesn't have the general full cognition that humans and animals have. So those sorts of things, when people think about like the AI, like robots taking over kind of thing, that's like the artificial general intelligence or the super intelligence, which is more like a machine that can do all of the things that a human can do or surpass human capabilities in all of these different domains. But for us, we're just looking at weak AI and what it can do for us in this specific domain. And essentially, what I'm looking at is that we can use this because it relies on kind of algorithms and more information that can help us simplify some of the choices that we're making. Okay. And so we're going to look at, there's a tool, we're going to look at one specific one called Chat GPT today. This is not the only one at all that exists, and there's loads and loads of these. But I'm going to link this to this topic of understanding the landscape of what's out there. I'm curious if people are using Chat GPT. Is that what you use, Maurizio? Give me a thumbs up, down, whatever's. Yeah, cool. Yeah, Robert. Cool. Yeah, if you're not familiar, it is a website. It's a AI machine. And if you Google Chat GPT, you can make a free account and use it. And what I like about it is that when we think about making decisions and trying to understand and make sense of what is out there in terms of this digital tools landscape, or you're weighing out like, okay, what should I be using? How does that work? What does it look like? If you just Google it, there's so many things that show up, right? Like we get like, okay, there's the ads for that. And you get the website for all of the different project management tools you're maybe Googling. Then you have to open each one and be like, okay, where's the information about this one? And how much does it cost? And oh, does it have this feature? But not everybody is like, here's the list of our features right up front, right? And so for general learning, that can be fine if you're just casually perusing, but it can be really overwhelming when we're trying to make sense of what's out there, what fits best, etc. And so one of the things that I like about tools like this is that it can just simplify things down. The caveat, of course, that it's like, it can't promise perfect information, etc., but it can offer some unique things. Okay. And so some examples of, and I took some different screenshots here of things that I've asked AI specifically for the purpose of this conversation, is you can ask something like, what are the tools people use to help tracking projects? So you're wondering about, okay, what are the things people are doing, or what is out there? I've heard of all of these ones. Where do I even start if I want to try to figure out which one I like, right? So you still have this list here, but it can provide a little bit of that container for, if I'm researching this, I now have a list of, okay, here are some popular tools. Okay. Let's say you use a tool like canva.com. I don't know if people use Canva, but it's It has a free option that's actually quite robust, or you can have a paid option that has offers a lot of kind of easy design things available. You can easily make social media posts and kind of has lots of templates that are really, really lovely. The Canva is great depending on what you're doing. And let's say you're like, oh yeah, what else is out there like this? Then you can just get a list, right? This is not the definitive list of all things that exist in the internet world, like Canva, but we've created a container, right? Like I now have a place to start with this. Yeah. Other types of things that you can ask, and some of you may know these things or be using it this way. But you can ask, like, list 10 popular CRMs. So you want to, even if you're just like, I don't actually need a specific tool right now, or I'm not like feeling like I'm missing something, but I do want to actively stay involved in learning and understanding the technological landscape. This is a great way to do that and to kind of like synthesize and simplify some of that process of not having yourself to comb through Google search results that can sometimes be kind of overwhelming. Okay. Um, Similarly, if you want differences between two different tools that exist, right? So Asana and Monday.com, which both have a lot of project tracking and communication and calendaring and task management. And it's like, okay, there's some similar things here, but like, what are the differences of this? And you can ask for some of this information that still, yes, you may want to go read more or learn more or ask more specifics about some of these, but it creates a container for this exploration, right? Um, you can also ask for things to be put in a table with pros, cons, and unique features, right? So you can say, yeah, tell me all these project management tools and give me some pros, cons, unique features, right? It doesn't mean in this moment I'm going to read these and be an expert on all of them, but it's a nice way to simplify the vastness of I Googled project management tools and am trying to like weigh out what's what and what's an ad from a website and what does that mean and get some synthesization here. Yeah. A couple of other things, questions you can ask, and then we're going to look at like what are the things we need to be thinking about as we're exploring different tools either that we've been given and kind of questions and things to keep on our mind. Okay. Other things that you could ask is like, I have to use Slack for work. What do I need to know? Right. So let's say there's a new tool that you are starting a new job and suddenly, oh, we're using this new thing I've never used before. You could use ChatGPT to just be like, give me the simplified couple paragraphs about like what this is. Does it answer every question you have? No. But does it also mean that if you're going into a meeting and you know that someone uses a tool that you've never used, that if you come here and read this like abbreviated version of everything, that you might feel a little more comfortable going into that meeting being like, okay, I have a general sense of what this tool is and can maybe even think about collecting those pieces. Yeah, great question, Lynn. So how trustworthy are the results received through an AI bot? So with all of, and I may have, oh yeah, you can see it on this one actually, because this is just like a screen cap. You can see the like results produced may produce inaccurate information about people, places, or facts, right? Because every tool is different, like based on how it's getting kind of fed information and what the process of this is. And it is I would not bet my life on anything here, right? Like I think having a healthy dose of skepticism and not relying like fully on like this is the ultimate truth end all be all makes sense because ultimately I think I'll come in a chat for a second on this. I think a good way to think about this, for example, is that the information that bots are producing is based on information that they've been fed, right? So they are combing and synthesizing information that's there, but that information is information that has come in different pathways, right? And so if we think about like, for example, some of the like medical AI stuff that's happening, and this feels irrelevant, but it I think connects back to this just in a really concrete way, is that there's a lot of research done around how AI can recognize in like bone scans and lung scans things that the human eye isn't as good at recognizing. And there are times even where the AI is like able to make correct diagnoses in a way that the humans like, I don't actually know what they're using here to have made that diagnosis. Like, I'm not sure why that's happening. But the AI is noticing or picking up on things that we can't sometimes. And also, though, when we think about the information that's getting fed into that AI, the information that is being given is okay, past patients' uh, results, bone scans, whatever, and whether or not people got diagnosed, didn't get diagnosed, et cetera. And so, in that context, it's like, okay, that all seems great. And they've discovered a lot of areas where um, folks who exist in marginalized communities that may not have as much healthcare, that maybe have been historically underdiagnosed with things, then the AI is not as good at correctly diagnosing those folks because their information is not as included in that subset, right? And so it's like the AI is accurate in terms of it is seeing of the information you have given me, the correct conclusions are that these people have this diagnosis, right? And there's information that the machine hasn't been given that it therefore cannot give us or other people. Okay. And so I think about this kind of as that same thing where it's like this is giving us information it has been given, which means it is limited by the information it's been given. I have found overall there's like lots of really good synthesization and information. It's a great starting, yeah, garbage in, garbage out. Totally. Yes, it depends on exactly. It depends on like what's being given in and out. I think it is to me the thing that it can do really well is cut down clutter to even help us see what we need to be examining and looking at further, right? So it's like in a you know, a question like this one of like, list the 10 most popular project management tools, including all of these features in a table. It did say, and I think I just cut it off because of image formatting PowerPoint, has the like caveat also often underneath that that'll say something like, popularity can be ranked a lot of different ways on these project management tools. Like, are we looking at sheer numbers of users? Are we looking at positive reviews? Like, there's acknowledgement that we can't really be like absolutist about the information that it's giving or assume like, oh, that means therefore these are the best project management tools. But I also think that's the same, honestly, that's the same thing we get if we Google something, right? Like if I Google something, anybody can make, I mean, Asana probably has 85 articles on their site that's like, the best tool and here's why, right? Um, Companies can buy other websites that look like unbiased review sites that actually are just advertising for whatever their product is. And so I think it's we need to always have that healthy dose of like, okay, this is a starting point. But I think that that doesn't inherently mean that it doesn't have the value of the use. And that's a really good question. And I think we need to continue asking that question as the way that AI is used and managed continues to expand, because I think the ways that machines get kind of fed and given information is going to continue evolving, and asking where does this information come from? What are the sources of this machine is always a really good thing to look at when it comes to AI. So very much that. I think the thing that is really useful when it comes to the vastness of what exists is that we can take something so complicated like understanding even what 10 tools are, name website. Like if we had someone make this table that is incomplete and we need more information, making this table would take quite a chunk of time for someone. And this was made in 10 seconds, right? And so it's not the answer to everything, but it is certainly a tool to use, especially when it comes to having a starting place and having some of the information narrowed down for us as we're trying to establish kind of the template of the tech world. I kind of think of it, I mean, and this is true just like in how our memory works, is that, and really how filing paper works, is that if we have a file cabinet that is all set up with the folders we need that exist, filing is a whole lot easier, right? Like I can make sense of where things go when all of the folders exist, the files are organized, I have the file cabinet, versus if I don't have any of those things and I'm like trying to file something and have to buy the file cabinet, make the system, figure out which folders I need, like that takes a lot more effort. And I think in this tech world, like we all need to and are sort of constructing our file cabinets of what's out there, how does it exist, how do I interact with it, what does it mean in my life, what do I need to use, want to use, what do I have to use, how do I navigate all of that. And this can just help us create some file folders. We might restructure things as we go, but it can help establish those. Okay. And so I like it for this kind of thing, the tables, the basic information, asking questions, asking, if you had to explain CRMs to a 5-year-old, what would you say? Right. And you get this answer that I think is actually kind of funny. It's a business that helps businesses keep track of their friends who happen to be their customers. CRMs help businesses remember all the fun things they do with their friends, like sending them emails or talking on the phone. That way, businesses can make sure they don't forget things to keep their friendship strong. Yeah, but it can be kind of funny and interesting. You also can ask a couple more of these of like, I have to use Slack and Asana for one job and Trello and Teams for another. How can I make my life easier? Is this going to be the absolute step-by-step that you want to follow that's going to make your life magic? No, but might it give you some ideas and some containers and some ways to identify areas of continued exploration? Definitely, right? So yes, tables, asking random information, etc. Okay, very good questions. Feel free to post them anytime. Other things. So diving back into this exploration, we're evaluating what tools we have. How do we keep moving forward in this? We're going to break this down a little bit more. I know this is a lot of information and we're starting kind of big and broad. As the series goes, we're going to continue to narrow in. And part of it is that, we could spend, multiple hours on any one individual tool. And that certainly has value. But the reality is there's probably everyone in this Zoom room. We're probably using hundreds of tools amongst even us who are here, and having the ways to think complexly and critically about these pieces and know ways that we can get ourselves succinct information or starting places and continuing to sort of expand our baseline knowledge is really an important foundational piece of the puzzle. Okay. And so if diving into this kind of exploration phase, and what are the things we want to think about if we're picking tools or exploring tools? And this obviously fits more with the folks who are not like given, here's the tool you have to use because you started this job at this place. We want to make sure that we're thinking about what are the pain points that we have. If those challenges are fixed, what would that look like? What stands in the way? Like, how do these pain points connect with each other? And doing some window shopping around those. Like if you find yourself either within an organization where you're providing consulting or within your own consulting business, I know everyone's doing slightly different things, structured differently. Like these pieces are going to look different, but how can we, especially if you're doing consulting work around specific similar things over and over again, what are the ways to do some window shopping? Maybe use some of the AI leverage to learn about, okay, what else are people doing for the pain points that I'm often addressing and often working within? And I think these are often kind of launching pads for, okay, yeah, what are people doing in these distinct areas? Oh yeah, great question. Thanks for asking. What do I mean by pain point? Totally. So it's a term that gets used kind of to refer to like what are the ongoing places of like friction or challenge can be for individuals or also in organizations. So this is going to look really different depending on the organization and what they're doing. But it's like it could be a pain point that like scheduling is always really exhausting and complicated, and we exchange a billion emails to try to pick an appointment time. Like that could be a like ongoing, just sort of like cost area of like this is frustrating. It could be like it's really hard to keep the staff numbers that are needed in the organization. So there's an ongoing staffing issue. Like that could be a pain point. It's basically like any recurring problem, right? Any ongoing struggle or issue that's happening. Yeah. Great question. Something that's important to think about when we're considering this is a lot of times when we want to find something that like solves a problem or that we think will solve the problem, or we're like, okay, we're having this issue with scheduling, task management, organization, whatever. Um, one of the challenges is that if we dive in trying to be like, oh, I've heard of that one thing, I'm going to see if that will work for us. There are times that we just don't understand the problem or a problem as well as we think we do. And so we don't always know what we're looking for until either we find it or until we put something into action and then are like, oh, wait, what's working here? What's not working? What does that mean? What does that look like? Um, and so we want to do some of that window shopping to understand it, to recognize like we're having an issue with this. Okay, what is available out there in the world of scheduling? This is where I find for my brain, maybe you are a person who likes to Google it and to dive in and to analyze and pull apart every piece. And I do like analyzing and weighing variables, but AI just cuts through some of the like, here's the format of you know, a table with some of this information that makes it easier then for me to be like, okay, I'm going to then pick two of these today to go look at and just peruse their websites, two of them tomorrow and two the next day to look at their websites. And I have at least six that are just there saying, hey, these are ones to start with. Doesn't mean it has to be the everything that exists, but it can be there. And I'll say too, in terms of both AI and Googling stuff, if you find you look at one and you're like, oh, that's really interesting that they have this feature. I didn't even know that was a thing. You can go back to AI and be like, what are other scheduling apps that have this feature? Or if you go and are exploring something and it's like, oh, this doesn't really have that thing, and this is why. I think I actually need this other thing. You can go back and ask, hey, what are other ones that have this? And then get a new list to kind of just organize that. Okay. So things, and this gets a little bit more in kind of the organizational communication realm, but I think it's relevant when we're looking at picking tools, is that sometimes we have a sense that something could be useful or impactful, or maybe we've heard of a tool someone else we know is using, or some other organization is using, or maybe you work with a different agency that is using a tool that you think this other organization might benefit from. But sometimes it's like we want to really evaluate and make sure that the tool is solving the right problem, right? The things that we're hoping that this will do and use are actually the things that it's going to do based on where we are. And so thinking about the different areas within the organization, which is going to vary based on organization, and looking at, okay, on a 1 through 10 scale, 10 is like we are excelling and knocking it out of the park in this area. Where are we in financial performance, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, productivity, innovation, whatever is relevant? And then looking at, okay, if we're a 6 out of 10, what would need to be different to be an 8 or a 9? And sometimes you may not know. And that's where the window shopping can help us sort of start to see possibilities, and our sort of brain starts being like, oh, interesting. I see how that could help us with this. But the more clear we're on of what we're looking for, the better it is. And I think similarly, this can be applied differently in two tools that you have been given that you didn't pick, but maybe because you're working with whatever organization you have to use, but looking for if they're using a tool centrally, and this is going to depend on what your role is in the consultation that you're doing, but looking at like, are there ways to leverage the things that are already being used tool wise to shift and change some of these pieces. Okay. Um, yeah, I already talked about this. Asking AI, even the broad questions. What do organizations do to improve innovation? It's going to pull from loads of blogs and websites around um, make your company more innovative, whatever. Is it going to be the perfect information? No, but it can be something simplified to hold on to. Okay. Other things. When we think about, I already talked about that. When we think about other kind of variables to weigh, some of these are obvious. Thinking about budgetary needs and realities. Do we have a set budget for the tool? Do we have a return on investment that we're hoping for as we implement this tool? Going to vary a lot by the tool that we're looking at. Thinking about scalability. I think this is super relevant also, even if you're using, maybe you have all the tools that on board already that you have capacity for or whatever. Um, Looking at as we do our daily tasks and the daily things that we do, checking in with ourselves about as I set up this folder in Google Drive, whatever, um, are there things that I could be keeping in mind about how this project, program, function, whatever might grow? And can I do any of those things now? Sometimes we don't know exactly what it'll look like, but I think when we'll talk more about implementation in a little bit and also next week, but um, when we're using something, looking at like, oh yeah, where are we now and where do we want to go? In an ideal world, what does this look like? And how can we create this in a way that will grow with us? And I think this is really hard often in a lot of arts organizations and a lot of nonprofit organizations because there often is firefighting that has to happen. There's often not enough funding and endless amounts of things that could be done and that want to be done. And so there can often be a sort of like, okay, get the project, whatever this is, get it done, get it launched. Okay, here's the next thing that has to be done, or the next grant cycle, or the next whatever. And so often I find there's a lack of kind of systems that are useful to have. And so, even just if we can bring our attention to thinking about scalability as we're doing the things that we do, that can be really useful. Thinking about integrations, I think too, if you are using multiple tools for the same job or across different organizations, exploring whether there might be integrations that would make your life better or easier. Sometimes there are some that probably seem quite obvious, like my Google Calendar links to my Motion calendar scheduler and project management and all of this stuff, right? Like we would anticipate and expect that to be a link that happens. Um, but there can often be other types of integrations that can really simplify life or automate things. And so seeing if there are integrations between the things that you use or if a new tool will integrate with other things you'll already use. Um, Thinking about security, what are the needs and concerns that we have? Do they meet those needs? Going to vary. Data ownership and portability. How easy is it to transfer data to another platform or off of the platform entirely if needed? In an ideal world, we're able to use whatever tool it is long term, and it's a good thing to learn about, to explore moving forward, right? And some of these things seem logical, right? It's like, oh yeah, of course I want to think about this. But I think this also falls into a category where even myself right now, I'm like, oh yeah, I should spend one of my like micro learning tech times during a future week just looking at what are the different types of common data ownership portability like systems that exist, you know? Like I know from my own experience with various tools like what the process is like to export and all of this, but I don't know that much about the reality of that in our tech world and should learn more about it. So it'll go on my list of curiosities, right? Um, Mobile app and browser considerations. If we're picking something, especially that's an organizational tool, is it used on phones? Is it used on desktops, laptops, Macs, PCs, whatever? Who needs to have access to these things, user roles and permissions. So considering what are the different things allowed within the app or the tool for, who can set stuff, who can not set stuff, etc. Does the tool have uh, data that you need, tracking data, which can be useful for identifying bottlenecks or issues or covering our productivity and what we've done, right? Like there's so many categories that are important to consider. Accessibility. Is the tool accessible? Does it have accessible features such as keyboard shortcuts or color contrast settings or screen reading compatibility, right? So thinking about both now within whatever the organization is, does this tool meet the needs of our teams? And also in the future in terms of accessibility and wanting to have that be inherently part of what we just have offered available as through our normal work systems. Thinking about how tech savvy the users are, what learning curve can we tolerate, like what support would we need in order to launch to use this on a daily basis, and what is the sort of labor or cost or energy of making that happen? What's that going to look like? How can we customize the various tools, right? Like these are all things that we can just sort of keep in mind as we go and look at things. I know this is so many things quickly. The YouTube link will be up. Also, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint as well, so you'll have these pieces. And we're going to continue diving into these things more in depth as well. But then again, going back to we can use AI to check what we may be forgetting. What am I forgetting to think about when evaluating different team collaboration tools? And it's like, is this, the list of things that you definitely upfront want to be thinking about evaluating that answers every question that ever existed? No, but it's a nice like check back, to like, oh yeah, am I thinking about the right things here? Like, have I covered the important basics? Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about implementation. I know time is taken by. I'm curious, are there questions, thoughts, stuff coming up? Cool. Nice, Robert. I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, I love the use of even just having that. To me, it's the simplified information. I'm glad that that is useful. Cool. Awesome. Cool. Well, I'll keep talking a little bit of implementation stuff as with the time that we have, and then we'll pick up next week where we left off. So let me pop back into share screen here. So we also want to think about, and these are all the questions that when we're window shopping, we don't necessarily want to be holding, because if I'm both trying to find this basic information on a website and determine and assess fully, is this going to work for us? Like that's a lot of cognitive variables that's challenging to weigh. But once we've maybe started to narrow it down or have the sense of like, okay, what are things going to look like? We can start applying some of these. And before we window shop, we can think through some of these of like, oh yeah, what do I know right now about this situation or this problem that I'm trying to solve? And then we want to revisit these things, right? Um, we always want to think about too, once we've picked something, what is the implementation going to look like? Who's going to be involved in making this happen? What are the top goals and priorities of putting this in place? And this is something that I think seems so obvious and everyone like may know, right? Like I can think of an organization that I was in that sorry, I was reading and talking at the same time, and then I lost track of myself in my head. So I'll come back to that question in a second. But I was in an organization, for example, and we implemented Slack in the organization, and I think it did make sense. And it, we were all like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, let's totally try this. And like, okay, we'll make, there was a little bit of structure of like, there'll be certain channels of these kinds of things. And like, yeah, let's try to use it this way or not this way. But there never really was a full, like sitting down and like deep clarity with, like, what are the real priorities and top goals of why we've implemented this, so that we have that to check back against, right? So that we can sort of continually like root back into like, okay, is the way we're actually using this meeting our goals? Like, is the way that we are prioritizing things, doing things, like helping us in alignment with our overall mission as an organization, but also the things that we set out or intended when we started this process. Um, yeah, so keeping that in mind. There's lots more implementation stuff, but I want to acknowledge this question that Barbara asked and also note that we'll talk more in depth about it next time because I know we have like 3 minutes at this point. Um, so the question, in case folks can't see it in the chat box, is: Are you worried at all about privacy concerns using ChatGPT? So I think this kind of is one of the. I think it is always good to be thinking about privacy concerns, and good to always be a conscious consumer and user, and that the more sort of intention and knowledge that we bring to that, the better. Because I think that there are inherent privacy risks with kind of everything that we do in the virtual world, and certain things that we know kind of on like a personal privacy pathway are safer than others. Like the bank website, we can generally trust that they've done a lot more due diligence around that than a random website where you can buy a knockoff something online, right? Like there are certain areas where we can know, for my personal information and data, this feels safer or better, etc. Um, and even within that, as we all know, there are organizations all the time that are large and financial based and all of these things that have data leaks and ruptures and all of this. And so it's like I think there are a couple of different layers around privacy that we'll get into uh, more in depth. So I will bookmark this. But I think the short answer is I'm always worried about privacy with every tool and online thing that I use. And I'm always looking to find um, the balance also between like risk management with that and figuring out what aligns and what doesn't align and what's a like level of risk I'm personally willing to take. And then ideally also being cognizant of risk factors for other folks, because I also don't want to engage in things that cause damage in the world as well. And sometimes it's really tricky, right? So like if we think about kind of privacy in the external world, it makes me think of, and I can't even remember what the name of this was, but for a while everyone was like making social media profile pictures and whatnot. And you could like customize pictures and design whatever. It would create sort of AI art images um, that were really cool looking, and you could very quickly make something that 20 years ago, even 10, you would have to commission someone to do, period. And it was really, really cool. And also, there were a lot of things brought up around like, oh, this was pulling people's copyrighted material from their like personal websites that then was like, okay, well, that doesn't feel okay to just be like stealing work from these people to use this in this way. And so I think there's like, there's lots of good layers here that we won't fully get into fully today. But yes, all of those things. All of that to say, great question. Let's keep talking about it and diving into it. And next week, we'll look more at implementation and kind of what this looks like and things to be thinking about for the tools that you may already be using. And if you're implementing a new tool, things that you want to think about as well. So thanks for being here and joining me, and hope to see you again next week.